Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Happy Monday, everybody. Today we are going to look at Venus opposing Uranus. Venus is in Scorpio, of course, Uranus is in Taurus. The two are opposing one another this week, and we're going to look at a few really interesting passages from some of my favorite astrologers that highlight some of the unique qualities of Uranus and Venus. And then we're going to use that as a jumping off point for reflecting on their archetypal combination as we approach the opposition this week. We're also, I think we have horoscopes later in the week for Venus-Uranus too, so there'll be more. But today, an archetypal reflection on Venus-Uranus. As always, before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel to grow when you give it the thumbs up. And when you share your comments and reflections afterward, it's really nice to see your interesting reflections and thoughts and feelings about the transits, or if you have them natally or what have you. But it also does help the channel to grow, which we really appreciate. Transcripts of any of the daily talks can be found on the website, nightlightastrology.com. Well, as you guys know, we are trying to raise the support of 1,777 backers by New Year's Eve. As of the time I'm recording this intro, we have rallied the support of 640 backers. That means we still need 1,137 by New Year's Eve. Can we do it? I think we can. I really do believe that we can. Usually we do the best in the last 2 weeks. We are down to about 13 days left to go, so we really need your support. If you have donated already, thank you. From me and my team, my family, we deeply thank you for supporting us and the work that all of us at Nightlight do to create this content and provide top quality, affordable, accessible education in astrology for people. If you have not donated, we would love your support. You can find the link pinned to the top of the comments section or in the description of this video. And when you go over to the Kickstarter, when you pledge, you can pick a variety of really interesting rewards. We have all kinds of readings and interesting workshops and lectures I've done in the past that are there for sale. Or you can pick up class passes. A one class pass is 50% off the normal rate. And then if you bundle 2, 3, 4 of our programs together out of the 6 that we offer, you can learn all about all of them on our website, by the way, which is nightlightastrology.com. When you pick up those class passes, the savings goes up to almost 75% off each individual program when you bundle them together. They don't expire. You can use them whenever you want. All of our courses are remote or live, so you can participate live or follow along at your own pace. You can spread them out. They don't expire. You could give one to a friend as a gift if you wanted to. So a nice flexible package that really helps the Kickstarter to do well when you guys pick those up. So we appreciate it when you do. Of course, any of the rewards and any dollar amount whatsoever really helps us meet our goals. So again, a big thank you to everyone who's already pitched in. You guys also know that I have been taking time at the beginning of every one of my talks to talk about, to share with you who I am and where I'm coming from. Sorry, I had something pop up on my screen I had to eliminate. So I've been taking some time to tell you more about myself and my values in the hopes that knowing more about me, you'll feel more comfortable supporting me and the channel in our annual Kickstarter. Today, I want to tell you about the 3 books that I hope to write in the upcoming years. The reason that I want to tell you about this is that one of the goals of our Kickstarter is to create an affordable reading service that empowers graduates and talented people who are coming through Nightlight to do readings, to get experience, and that also allows flexible price points for people who may not otherwise be able to afford a reading. Selfishly, though, the thing that this also does for me is it allows me to slightly decrease my client load. If I can slightly decrease my client load, I can create space within which to write. Now, I'll tell you, the biggest transit of my 2023 has been Uranus to my natal Venus, just like we're talking about Uranus and Venus today. One of the things that it did, which is most profound for me, maybe, in addition to a few other cool things, was it awakened within me the desire to write again. My first book was something that I wrote when I was in my late 20s and published during my Saturn return. And it was a book about ayahuasca. And that was 14 years ago almost. And so it's been a long time. And I wasn't sure I would ever write again. I got busy with my career, owning a yoga studio, getting married, having kids, building my astrology career. And there's a creative element to what I do that's very satisfying, but it's not quite like writing. I did write for a while until I went to video blog. So I during this Uranus-Venus dynamic, part of what we're talking about today, I had that transiting my natal Venus, Uranus transiting my natal Venus, which is my ascendant ruler, and it awakened within me the desire to start writing again. And as I'm writing the current book, which I'm going to tell you about in a second, I also got the idea for 2 other books. So I want to tell you about those books I plan to write, which the success of the Kickstarter helps me to create the space to do. So anyway, in case you're interested. So the first one is The Oracle Speaks. That's the book I'm working on right now. And I'm sure that'll get done regardless of how the Kickstarter does. Hoping the Kickstarter does well. But if I want to keep writing and create a little bit more space within which to try to capture some of what I've learned and am developing an awareness of as a now, I guess, somewhat of a veteran astrologer, then it's really important that I create the space within which to do it. The Oracle Speaks is a book that I'm writing right now. And if I had to give an elevator pitch, it would go like this. This book is everything I know and have learned thus far about divination, deliberately encrypted into story form. Deliberately encrypted into story form so that people can have more of an experiential transmission of divinatory gnosis. I'm not saying I know everything about astrology or divination or anything like that, but I've learned a lot. And I have a lot of experience under my belt at this point, reading and doing astrology for people. And so this book is really everything that I've understood about oracles and oracular consciousness and divination. And it is deliberately encrypted into story form in this book. And I'm really excited about it because ancient astrologers deliberately encrypted what they knew about astrology into texts. I'm following the same path, but rather than it being a textbook that's encrypted, it's a storybook that's encrypted with philosophical, with divinatory philosophy. So I hope you guys will enjoy it. That's the first book. The second book is a book about what astrology has taught me in 15 years. Next year, I will be in my 15th year as an astrologer. I'm somewhere between 12 and 13,000 charts. It's been a minute since I've got an accurate count, but that amount of readings and this long of doing astrology, I have learned an enormous amount. Some years ago, when I hit 10, I did a series called 10 Years and 10,000 Charts, because in my 10th year, I eclipsed having done 10,000 readings, lots of different kinds, short, express, horary, natal, so not just one type. And I made a series on 10 things I've learned in 10 years and 10,000 charts. And it was really, I think it was a good series. It was one of the ones I have loved the most. And I want to write a book about what I've learned, not just about astrology, but more importantly about life. And what kind of wisdom do I see people getting from astrology? Practical, not a book about what astrology has taught me about the sign of Pisces or something, What has astrology taught me? What is the spiritual value of astrology as I see it after doing this for 15 years? And I have a lot of ideas for that in mind, and some really interesting ideas for how to structure it and do that too, that I'm really excited about. No title for it. The third book that I have in queue that I'd like to write, and God willing, any of this will happen, by the way, but I hope it does. A book about astrology for skeptics. I notice more and more as astrology is getting more popular and there's a lot of sort of pop astrology, that there's also a huge amount of critics who have many very fair and valid criticisms to make about astrology. So I want to write a book basically trying to establish what astrology is. See, one of the reasons that people think that astrology is bogus is because they think it's bogus insofar as it claims to be a science. And really, it's better to think about astrology as a divinatory science, which is different than an empirical science. So this is a book that would be about what astrology is and what it isn't. What it is a divinatory form of knowing that has its own kind of logic and its own kind of science. What it isn't is an empirical science. And so this would be a book, really a book kind of helping people understand what astrology is who may be brand new and have total reservations about it. And I have already like a long list of very interesting ideas that I'd like to develop into chapters for this book that would highlight, things from my practice, things that I've seen and observed, and also addressing the most common forms of skepticism that exist. So yeah, anyway, these are books that I have in queue. I hope that they get written. There's no I don't carry expectations about these things. That's just nice to be inspired to write again after so long between my last book and the new book. Anyway, I thought you guys might find that interesting. If the Kickstarter is successful, and if I can create a little bit more room in my schedule through the establishment of our affordable reading service, then I hope to write things like this. And I want to say again, thank you so much to everyone who's contributed so far. We deeply appreciate your support. We still need 1,137 backers by New Year's Eve. Let's go. We can do it. All right, that's it for today. I hope you guys will enjoy today's talk on Venus opposite Uranus. Bye. All right, so today we're taking a look at Venus in the sign of Scorpio opposite Uranus in the sign of Taurus, a reiteration of the Taurus-Scorpio axis that we have been looking at through the north and south node of the moon over the past couple of years, the eclipses that we've had in those signs, Jupiter being in that sign. It feels like every month, the Scorpio-Taurus axis is back asking us to reconsider things. So here we are again, taking a look at that axis. And I think today what we're going to do is we are going to, first of all, let's look at the date. So it's December 21st that Venus opposes Uranus. So that's this week. Let's take a look at it on the real-time clock. And we're going to look at it again from I have 5 different things to watch for. Let's point it out here with the the epic pen. All right, so here you can see we have Venus moving through the opposition with Uranus. Now, some other things that are important to pay attention to, the hosts. So Uranus is in the sign of Venus, and Venus is in the sign of Mars. Mars, in the meantime, who is essentially now hosting the opposition because the opposition is rooted in Venus and Mars, we can then play out this application of Mars to Neptune. We can also notice that we have coming through almost immediately after the winter solstice and the Mercury cazimi happening on the winter solstice, or the Capricorn solstice. Obviously, it's not winter if you're in the southern hemisphere. So that is a powerful little subset of factors to be considered. And I'm going to, after we're done looking at the 5 things to watch for that are sort of specific to Venus Uranus, I'm going to come back to these factors and mention them at the end of today's talk. So there are 5 things that I think are important to watch for. And what I'm going to do is I've got 2 little, very brief passages I want to read you, one from Liz Green, one from Richard Tarnis on Uranus. And then I want to use those ideas to contextualize our transit this week. So let's start with Liz Green. This is from a book that she wrote as a part of the CPA series, that's the Center for Psychological Astrology, called The Outer Planets and Their Cycles, the Astrology of the Collective. But I want to read you what she says about the meaning of Uranus, which is quite powerful. It's about 2 pages. Uranus is the first god in Greek myth, the heavenly father who engenders the universe. He emerges from the womb of Gaia, who is mother or chaos, and then he mates with her. Uranus belongs to the air, to the sky. He is a sky god. He is a god of ideas and flies on the wings of thought. In esoteric circles, this is sometimes called the divine mind. Plato wrote about the divine ideas upon which all worldly forms are patterned. It's as though something exists before the universe is formed, which is the idea of a universe. So Uranus has something to do with a pattern, an ordering force, which does not yet have body. And this is why it's important to talk about, because Uranus is, of course, getting into a relationship with Venus, who in many ways is the body. Also, the way she's talking about Uranus, it's important to note, is closely associated with what we consider to be archetypal, that kind of eternal idea that the planets represent, the field and tapestry of images that stem forth from a archetypal center. And that's what the planets are kind of pointing to from the standpoint of ancient philosophy. Uranus comes to a bad end in myth because he's castrated by his son Kronos, that's Saturn. His severed genitals fall into the ocean, which is fertilized by his seed, and out of the foam springs Aphrodite. That's the goddess of love. That's Venus. Uranus is a fertility god, but not in an earthy sense. He fertilizes with creative thought, with spirit. I think we can see his footsteps in history whenever a great new creative idea erupts in the collective. Around the time of the discovery of Uranus, the idea of democracy and the freedom of the individual was a powerful force that changed society. During the French Revolution, the justification of the Reign of Terror was the cry of liberty, equality, fraternity. The French monarchy was disposed in the name of an idea, and the idea was a tremendous force which generated great changes in France. Ideas can be moving forces in the world just as powerful as economic pressures. They erupt from the collective and seize the minds of a people, and then there's nothing that can be done to stop it, even attempts at suppression. During the Italian Renaissance, another idea took hold of people which caused enormous changes in society. This was the idea that human nature was divine. That may sound terribly simple, but it wasn't simple then. It was heresy. If human beings are God, then they don't need intermediaries to interpret God's will to them. They're capable of experiencing their own contact with the divine. If they don't need intermediaries, then they don't need the church for their salvation. They might need it as a fellowship or an inspiration, but they aren't dependent upon it for their experience of grace. That idea contained immense power. It allowed people to explore other philosophies and gods without fear of being tainted. It spawned the creative flowering, which we call the Renaissance. It restored dignity to human beings who were no longer mere worms stained by original sin, who had to live their lives consumed by guilt and fear. Pico della Mirandola's oration to man begins, "What a great miracle is man! He partakes of the nature of both gods and daimons." This kind of eruption of a powerful idea which seizes people's imagination is what I associate with Uranus. The trouble with these ideas is that they come from the heavenly world, and so they are usually a little too advanced for the world at the time. The divine dignity of humanity, which captured the creative minds of the Renaissance, was a little too much to swallow, and so it was duly suppressed because Uranian ideas are inevitably too far ahead of the culture, which breeds them. If an idea suddenly bursts into being in the outer world, it has had to travel up from the depths, and it's colored by the sign through which Uranus is passing. That sign represents the sphere of life which will be changed or transformed by the new idea. A few people become its mouthpiece, and it starts to work like yeast within society. But it will take a very long time before the forms of the world can be altered enough to accommodate it. Or you might say that it will take a very long time before individual people are capable of integrating it into their lives without some frightening distortions. Jung thought it took around 80 years for some new content emerging from the collective unconscious to work its way through the different levels of society. He was making an intuitive assessment, since of course there's no way we can measure such things, but this time span he gives is roughly the time it takes Uranus to return to any given sign. Uranus's cycle, as I said, is 84 years. It's the prophets and visionaries and artists who seem to catch the new idea while it's still boiling and bubbling in the depths. Eventually, it becomes something popular among the mass of people, but usually by that time they've burned the prophet at the stake or ruined him or her. They say, "We have a wonderful new idea. Why don't we make a new set of laws which incorporate it?" Then they give honor to the handful of Uranian people who first had the idea, even though it was originally heretical. The problem of Uranus in myth is that Saturn Kronos castrates him. It's only much later that he's regenerated as Aphrodite and translated into something creative and harmonious, which the world likes. That's what we're talking about right now. That's why I'm reading this passage. Because as she said right here, and I'm going to refer to this a few more times, the problem of Uranus in myth is that Saturn Kronos castrates him. It's only much later that he's regenerated as Aphrodite, Venus, and translated into something creative and harmonious, which the world likes. You see how problematic it is when we have Venus and Uranus in an opposition, because sometimes what that means is that the new idea is running into roadblocks with people who disapprove, or with the controversy or provocative nature of what it means to actually integrate and embody something that is profoundly different, a profoundly different approach. We can go back to our map of the mountains and imagine a Uranian idea traveling slowly upward from the bedrock into the lives and minds of individual people. If you remember, I place Saturn on the borders between the individual and the collective. So Saturn, and notice she places Saturn on the borders. She doesn't say that Saturn is a limit. She says that Saturn is a border between things. That's how ancient people thought of Saturn too. So don't go saying Saturn is limits all the time. That's not entirely correct. Anyway, just a side note. If you remember, I place Saturn on the borders between the individual and the collective. So Saturn is the first thing that the new idea hits on its way upward and outward into the world. Saturn is a boundary which separates me from you. So the people who will feel the rush upward of these new movements and ideas are, I think, the people who have Saturn and Uranus in strong aspect in the birth chart. That's just sort of her pet theory. But I would say that you have oftentimes people who have strongly dignified or strongly placed Saturns and strongly placed Uranuses in placement of Uranus in the chart. Doesn't have to be that they're an aspect. Anyway, I think this group of people, particularly those who have Saturn conjoining Uranus, get the itch first. They sense the need for change on an ideological level, and they become the willing or unwilling mouthpieces for the new idea before it becomes something acceptable in society. A person who has Uranus in strong aspect to the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Mars will also feel the rush of anticipation about the new idea, but it will affect that person differently. If Uranus aspects Venus, for example, the person will act out that new idea through their relationships without necessarily being aware of it as a new idea. But the impact is very different when Uranus hits Saturn. And she goes on to talk about the different planets, which is fascinating, but I'll stop there. One of the things that's really important that we recognize is that when Venus, by the way, in Scorpio, in a Mars-ruled sign, tends to be very provocative. When Venus hits in opposition to Uranus, who is in Venus's sign, it's as though there is a new idea about what it means to be joyful, or what it means to experience pleasure, what relationships look like, what an embodied sense of form and beauty look like. So Venus wants to bring things into the world of sensuality. That's our material world. That's our everyday experience. That's our likes and dislikes. That's our pleasures, our joys, and our dissatisfaction. That's our relationships, not just human relationships, but our relationship with everything whose feedback and language is the language of pleasure. And by correspondence, of course, pain or subjective dislikes and like what we consider to be sort of quote unquote ugly. I use that word relatively, of course. Now, when that's what Venus is up to, and Venus in Scorpio likes to push our buttons and make us look at complicated, difficult, sometimes unconscious material, especially in terms of the kinds of stuff that is hard to admit that we love or like, or that challenges us, or that requires a kind of depth and intensity, which isn't always easy. And yet we are complex creatures of many passions. And so Venus in Scorpio is a wonderful placement to be challenging us to look very deeply at what constitutes joy, pleasure, and happiness in our lives, if we're really honest, if we're really authentic, if we can kind of go really deep. Put it in an opposition to Uranus, and it is though this exploration of deeper, hidden, subconscious content in the Venusian realm is being asked to consider a revolutionary new idea. It is like a new archetype, a new image that has this sort of Platonic sense of it. That's the Uranian world, the creative vision that's like appears in fire. Remember, the god often associated with Uranus is Prometheus, who stole the fire of the gods, which is the Ade, the archai, the eternal ideas in the divine mind. That's like a beautiful blueprint of a flower in the mind of God. It's like if you've ever had an idea appear in meditation or an altered state, or just hits you like lightning sometime. That's very Uranian. Now imagine that Venus, already in this provocative state, is meeting Uranus in the sky through oppositional tension. Ooh, that's a big thought. That's a big idea, that's seeking sensual physical embodiment, but it's also something maybe a little provocative, complex, and taboo that we have to look at before or as this idea seeks embodiment. And we may even want to reject it because we think, oh, it's just too much somehow. But it has such transformational potency for this reason. And we think to ourselves also that the idea is coming forth at this time. Remember, there's always going to be a tendency to look at it as at these ideas as sort of heretical. When they first come in, because they challenge the status quo, we tend to say no. And that we set up barriers or boundaries between ourselves and new ideas. And that's the Saturn piece. But that doesn't mean that in that sense, Saturn can be trying to limit or constrain the new from crossing over and touching our lives and becoming embodied in new ways. But it's also about Saturn can also mediate and help Uranus to sort of come through and filter in form. Well, remember that Saturn has just turned direct recently in the exaltation of Venus and is in a trine to Venus by whole sign as this is happening, which suggests an ability to actually integrate a large and difficult idea, to let it filter through emotionally and seek expression. So it's kind of a nice pairing in the sky at the moment for a revolutionary idea to become sensually embodied. And I don't think we're going to get as much fussing and kicking from the the thought police, the ones that say that's heretical in ourselves or around us, because Saturn is nicely configured by sextile and trine to both Uranus and Saturn, Uranus and Venus, I should say. All right, so the second thing I want to read you today is from Richard Tarnis. Now, this is his description of Uranus, and then I'm going to read you his description of Venus, because they're quite beautiful, and he says a lot of things that are easy to forget about the planets. I mean, we think of the planets, and we have like a sort of a list of keywords that we're used to, and so sometimes it's easy to forget some of the keywords that are important, or the descriptions of the archetypal tapestry of the planet. So Uranus is associated with the principle of change, rebellion, free. Oh, by the way, sorry. Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnis. If you haven't read it, put it on your list. This is is easily one of my favorite books of all time. Uranus is empirically associated with the principle of change, rebellion, freedom, liberation, reform, and revolution, and the unexpected breakup of structures, with sudden surprises, revelations, and awakenings, lightning-like flashes of insight, the acceleration of thoughts and events, with births and new beginnings of all kinds, and with intellectual brilliance, cultural innovation, technological invention, experiment, creativity, and originality. It's also linked to the occurrence of sudden breakthroughs and liberating events, to unpredictable and disruptive changes. Hence, the planet is sometimes called the cosmic trickster. Another set of themes related to Uranus is with celestial and the cosmic, astronomy and astrology, science and esoteric knowledge, space travel and aviation. With respect to personal character, Uranus is regarded as signifying the rebel and the innovator, the awakener and the individualist, the dissident, eccentric, restless, and wayward. So those are the Uranian themes. And you can feel within them that the main reason, if we go back to what Liz Green said, that we have rebellion, freedom, liberation, reform, and revolution, sudden surprises, revelations, and awakenings, lightning-like flashes of insight, the acceleration of thoughts and events, is because Uranus is like Prometheus coming down with the torch of fire from the gods and just delivering it into the mind with this sort of sudden illumination. And when that touches on Venus, then that illumination is seeking embodiment in sensuality, relationships, sexuality, love, creativity, the arts, women, the feminine qualities, archetypally speaking. Venus is the principle of desire, love, beauty, value. Value meaning what I love, what I like, what I value, and also, by contrast, what I don't. The impulse and capacity to attract and be attracted, to love and be loved, to seek and create beauty, harmony, to engage in social and romantic relations, sensuous pleasure, artistic and aesthetic experience, the principle of Eros and the beautiful, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. So you can see how this week we have this impulse to change and to import some kind of new flashes of insight and ideas into the sensual domain of Venus. So what happens when new ideas or ideals in love seek embodiment? Well, that can be very disruptive for relationships, because if relationships have been governed by a set of ideas, habits, patterns, beliefs, routines, and values that are suddenly being disrupted, well, of course, that can disrupt the relationship. But it can disrupt it positively. New ideas, revelations, and values that are trying to awaken Venus can also awaken a relationship. Changes and disruptions in relationships are often revolutions in relationships, which is why I see many clients who are in happy relationships that go through a Uranus-Venus dynamic, and the relationship is awakened into its next iteration, you might say. It's like version 3.0 is, sorry to make endless tech metaphor comparisons, but it is like you're somehow upgrading the interface between you and someone else, or the way in which you relate, or the way in which you create pleasure together. Sex in marriage that has, maybe gotten a little bit stale can suddenly awaken and get really interesting. Um, Patterns with friendships, patterns with your girlfriends. If you have sometimes even Venus as daughters, you'll see that they're going through, I don't know, like I've seen people go with Uranus hitting their Venus and their daughters are going through puberty or something, which is a kind of a funny way of looking at it. But you'll never be, you'll never be able to exactly predict the way in which Uranus is going to awaken or shift or create a kind of paradigm change in the Venusian realm. And so in a way, it's like all Uranus transits we can talk about in terms of this kind of burning bush-like quality that suddenly appears. Take off your sandals, you're on holy ground. Reflect, contemplate, and know that careful mediation between the Platonic sort of Pythagorean realm of ideals and lightning-like images that suddenly appear in the actual sensual embodied world takes some doing. The opposition also sometimes shows up in terms of impulsive, polarizing ways of trying to incorporate something Uranian. Uranus opposition in the midlife, for example, will often show up as people having a quote unquote midlife crisis, which basically means that they're flipping out, trying to incorporate changes too quickly, recklessly, impulsively, destructively, which, in the end may lead to some good things, even though you have to kind of go through the fire. But generally speaking, it's good to have a kind of reflective mediating ground or space within which you can take new ideas and slowly bring them in, usher them, steward them, shepherd them, whatever, midwife them, whatever, word we want to use. But that's important for oppositions of all kinds, especially Uranus, because they come so quickly. So new ideas, ideals in love and their embodiment, but also a warning to be thoughtful and careful in the way that we bring heaven and earth together. If you go too fast, it's sort of violating, I don't know, I imagine like a young couple and, maybe there's a tendency for a guy who's the kind of masculine Uranian quality, just go too quick. Maybe there's a little bit of foreplay needed, right? Maybe there's a romantic, gentle, sort of incremental way of approaching the cataclysm of making love for the first time. And that's not a perfect like analogy, but the point is that we should slowly try to bring Uranus into the Venusian realm. Otherwise, we can offend her sensibilities, her love of harmony, her love of flow. And in that way, Uranus can be like, I really want to look beautiful. So I go and I get a plastic surgery and suddenly my face is sort of, maybe it doesn't look exactly the way I wanted it to because I didn't carefully seek out the right person and the right approach. I just like did some kind of alteration like too quickly. You know what I mean? So it's the same thing when someone gets an impulsive tattoo with Venus, Uranus, etc. Number 4 would be breakthroughs, disruptions, rapid change that affect us creatively. Like Venus has so much to do with our own creative process. And I think that takes place in different areas of life for everyone. Some people are more creative at work, some at home, some in their relationships, some in their friendships. Like, where is the creative ground in your life? And if you don't have one, Venus is good for awakening the need for one. But if you do have one, then the question becomes, can you notice the impulse to change coming into that area of your life where Venus is most sort of readily expressing herself? You can learn a lot about that by looking at the house placement of Venus in your chart and the sign placement as well. So just expect that these things can happen and know that sometimes they happen in really big ways and sometimes like subtler ways. And that usually depends on whether or not Uranus in particular, transiting Uranus, is contacting anything by conjunction, square, opposition, trine, or sextile in your natal chart. The biggest ones usually being like the squares, oppositions, conjunctions, and exact trines. Anyway, the experimental Venus is also worth pointing out here that for many of us, this will be nothing more than a blip on the radar for a couple of weeks where, I don't know, we just get our cosmic kink on. You're just eager to try something a little different. I find it really interesting that this is coming through as Uranus is squaring my natal Venus. So I have a Uranus transit to my natal Venus while Venus in the sky is opposing transiting Uranus. And I find, where I find it coming through right now is in the writing of my book. I feel like my hair is on fire while I'm writing. It's really, it's been really profound, honestly. Anyway, and I hope you'll all check it out. You can pick it up through the Kickstarter. The experimental Venus may, for many of us, last no longer than a week or two. And yet, don't underestimate how powerful little shifts, which become like little cracks in the concrete through which the flowers can start rising up. Don't underestimate how important little shifts of value and beauty and experimentation and originality around Venusian things right now, even small ones, can in time lead to the embodiment of new values in your life that take off and become they flourish in ways that you won't anticipate from such a small, fast transit, where maybe you just change the color of paint in a room, but that can have a profound effect on the psyche in subtle ways over time. Anyway, so that is our exploration of Venus and Uranus today. I'm thinking we might look at some horoscopes too, just to kind of refresh ourselves on the axis across which the Venus-Uranus opposition is taking place. But I'm going to meditate on that, and then we'll see. Anyway, so I hope you guys are off to a great start of your week, and we will see you again for more soon. Don't forget to head over to the Kickstarter, by the way. You can find the link in the description of this video. You can also find it pinned to the top of the comment section. Head over there, help us get to our goal. We still have a ways to go before New Year's Eve. We're trying to get to 1,777 backers. You can pick up 50% off any of my online courses. There's 6 different online courses we offer, and you bundle them together. You get a 4-class pass. You start to save about 75% off the course of the price of each class. So anyway, we really deeply appreciate all of you who have already pitched in. If you haven't yet, please consider helping us support this channel. Me and my staff, we all really appreciate it. Hope you guys have a good one. We'll see you again soon.